because Australia relies on that migration to, fix some of those shortages in the market, So, for example, if there's a shortage of, say, social workers, nurses, teachers, the government can utilize the migration policy to direct people in that direction by making it appealing for that to be a pathway and therefore addressing those shortages. Now, if you have no migration, how is it going to be addressed? There's some things that local Australians just don't want to do. And so that's where the issue comes into play. And for me, that having that lever and having that migration, that's very, very important. I think the Australian economy relies on it.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show for Australians who want to learn how to unlock their full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and to live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life that you really want. Let's get started.
Hi freedom fighters. How important is overseas migration to Australia and what are the benefits? What influence has this migration had and is having on housing? And what if we stop migration from overseas? Would this actually solve our current housing and rental crisis? Well, it's fair to say that overseas migration levels have become a very hotly debated topic in recent times, and sadly, many politicians and media commentators looking for donkeys to pin the tail on for our current housing affordability and rental crisis are pretty quick to point the finger at increasing levels of our overseas arrivals for all of our housing woes. But this is a very narrow, simplistic and misguided attempt to deflect blame onto one single cause instead of considering the decades of housing supply neglect and a multitude of other dynamics that have actually accumulated into our current housing squeeze. As a recent CoreLogic report rightly observed, overseas migration has frequently been called out as one of the primary factors influencing the housing market. In the face of higher interest rates, lower consumer sentiment and stretched housing affordability, values and rents continue to rise and vacancy rates plummet as net overseas migration hits record highs. Now, not surprisingly, heated discussions around migration are drawing more focus as our housing affordability worsens. But there are many other factors driving values in the rental market. Migration is not the only demand-side factor putting pressure on housing affordability and accessibility. A sharp reduction in the number of people per household early in the pandemic has added to dwelling demand by around 120,000 households, largely while border restrictions were in place. Other factors that have also contributed to smaller average household sizes include our ageing population and falling marriage rates. Private rental market demand has also increased over decades, with falling rates of home ownership and a declining portion of social housing within the housing stock. Now, at short-term face value, it's easy to conclude that Australia is currently experiencing a large increase in migration. But the numbers presented don't tell the full story. In fact, the migration numbers currently recorded by the nation simply reflect a rebalancing after the pandemic border closures in 2020 and 2021. Australia's updated population forecasts are actually 375,000 people below pre-pandemic forecasts. So Australia's population is actually expected to be smaller than previously forecast, irrespective of the current catch-up period of migration. So the short-sighted narrative that there's currently a big Australia policy in play is little more than media massage myth. It's important to note that the immediate spike in net overseas migration in recent times is partly a temporary response to make up for the economic damage we experienced from the net population loss experienced following COVID border closures and travel bans. So overseas migration has been pushed higher by a concentrated number of overseas arrivals in a fairly short space of time, together with a 22% drop in departures compared to the historic 5-year average, as an increasing number are actually reticent to leave our great country. And notably, according to CoreLogic analysis, there's been fewer arrivals to Australia since COVID than we would have seen without travelling restrictions. So I'm confident that the short-term catch-up spike in migration will actually normalise in time. So I don't know about you, but growing knee-jerk calls to halt immigration as a solution to our housing woes is clear evidence to me of very short-sighted naivety it's likely to have much more significant unforeseen consequences, because the simple fact of the matter is you can't shrink to grow. But let's play devil's advocate and explore what would be likely to happen if we reduced, capped, or actually ceased overseas immigration. A temporary cap or ceasing of migration may relieve housing demand in the short run, but COVID-19 has already demonstrated that longer-term volatility issues arise with temporary migration caps. And previous Get Invested guest and leading demographer Simon Kustermacher tackled the zero migration scenario in one of his recent columns, along with some great commentary from fellow industry stalwart Michael Yardney, which I'll now draw on. Kustermacher explained that in a continued strong migration scenario, ABS stats suggest that our population could grow from 26.6 to 31.6 million over the next decade, creating expanding urban landscapes, evolving communities, and a growing consumer base driving ongoing economic growth. In contrast, Kustermacher explains that a zero migration scenario paints a dramatically different picture, with our population stalling at only about 27.2 million. Now, this decline of 4.4 million Aussies might seem beneficial in terms of reduced pressure on resources, but there are far bigger consequences to consider. Because less people mean less consumers, less entrepreneurial spirit, and a potential decline in cultural diversity that's actually going to be critical to fuel innovation at a time when it's never been more important. Australia's current demographic makeup skews towards a younger economic generating profile due to our migration policies. But according to Kustermacher, in a no-migration future, this dynamic changes significantly with a number of serious potential consequences. Firstly, we'd face an elderly care and quality of life crisis for our growing ageing population that's supported strongly by migrant worker skills. Secondly, our already suffering healthcare system would suffer increased burden as our population ages, without the offset of younger migrant workers supporting them both economically and physically. And thirdly, at a time when the construction industry is already in tatters and can't keep up with required demand, removal of skilled migrant workers would further slow down housing and infrastructure developments and increase costs. And reducing the potential workforce by 4.4 million people would not only reduce the labour pool, but would also alter the complete dynamic of the workforce, leading to increased labour costs, lower productivity, and a reduction in competitiveness. So clearly, limiting overseas migration is a road to ruin because, as I said earlier, you can't shrink to grow. Now, to round out the argument, let's consider the flip side in terms of the long-term benefits that overseas migration has and will continue to bring to our land of opportunity. As a recent Business Council of Australia report recently demonstrated, the success of our great country has always been built and will continue to prosper on the back of overseas migration. Today, almost 30% of all Australian residents are migrants, and close to half had at least one parent born overseas. And over the last 40 years, migration has made up over half of Australia's population growth, increasing to 2/3 in recent times. So clearly, migrants are active and highly valued contributors to our increasingly diverse society. Now, from an economic standpoint, as I've already touched on, young skilled migrants help manage our otherwise ageing population, fill critical skills and labour shortages, and bring new ideas and international connections to help the future of our economy. As an example, it's been estimated that for every 1,000 migrants, there's a $124 million economic dividend each and every year to Australia. But migration delivers more than just economic benefits because it also enriches our diversity and helps us become a much more outward-looking nation. So Australia has been nothing short of a multicultural success story, and in my opinion, we need to allow this to continue. While a catch-up spike in net overseas migration may be adding immediate demand-side pressures to housing costs, long-term strategic migration policy linked to continued economic prosperity shouldn't be influenced or hijacked by political expediency resulting from short-term volatility in migration and property markets. Instead, a more consistent, longer-term target for migration is needed to enable better planning of housing supply, with migration used to ensure a more productive labour force that assists in the delivery of much-needed housing and infrastructure shortfalls. So we shouldn't be cutting off our noses to spite our face. We need to stop scapegoating migration as the cause of our property yields and put more time, energy and money into growing housing supply by incentivising rather than penalising mum and dad investors to increase housing stock and make much more efficient use of existing housing. Remember, You can't shrink to grow. Clearly, a major mindset shift from a fixed scarcity outlook to a growth approach is required here by our politicians, policymakers, and the population at large to reframe our situation and accept some short-term pain for much bigger long-term gain. Because migration isn't just a policy choice, it's a vital element of Australia's identity and our future prosperity. And our returning guest, Aman Sethi, knows this very well. As you heard last week, Aman is the child of immigrant parents, and he possesses a profound understanding of the challenges and triumphs faced by migrants in their pursuit of a better life. Growing up in a diverse community, he witnessed firsthand the struggles that migrants go through. This ignited his unwavering empathy and dedication to delve deeper into the complexities of migrant experience, leading him to create an organisation that caters to migrants' needs in two crucial areas: job search and visa assistance. His successful and growing business, JICS, is driven by Aman's passion to make a positive impact on the lives of migrants, providing them with invaluable support on their journey to a better future. And much of his continued success revolves around his mindset. So to dive deeper into the overlapping spheres of mindset, migration, and their flow-on effects to property investing, welcome back, and let's get invested again, Aman.
Good to be back, Bushy. Hope you're well.
I'm very well, and thanks for putting up with that long diatribe from me, but I'm quite passionate about the importance of migration to the future of our great country. But I guess before we sort of dive into that, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about JICS if you can, because in terms of, as we discussed last time, your initial name for JICS, Just Imagine Consulting Services, which I think is a great name. Can you tell us why you created it? What does JICS actually do, and who's it actually best suited for?
Sure. So, yes, definitely I can elaborate a little bit more on this side. So, we created the company about, 7+ years ago, about 7.5 years now. And so we assist in three main areas within the migrant community predominantly. So one is obviously immigration and visas, whether that's general skilled migration or whether you're talking about employer sponsorship as well. So that's number one. Number two is job search assistance. So helping migrants when they actually land here, or otherwise international students when they're looking for that first job after finishing their degree. So we help a lot in terms of their job search side as well. And number three is the international education side, where we help international students get into mostly bachelor's and or master's degrees in Australia and help them with the certificate of enrollment process and international education. So so that's a quick summary. Those are the three areas that we focus on, and I think those are the areas that are very critical for a lot of people in the migrant community as well.
Absolutely agree. Now, we touched on the sort of foundational importance of mindset to achieving sustainable success in our chat last week, along with the critical influence of migrants to the growth of this great country, which are both subjects that have been instrumental in your success, and I know that you're as passionate about them as I am. So I want to dive into them today, along with their linkage to property investment success. And I want to start with mindset. And I guess from a mindset perspective, in terms of what you've experienced among your community, what are some of the common mistakes that you see people making in relation to mindset?
Sure. So in relation to mindset, I think people, I find generally, they focus on the little things too much, and they don't look at the big picture sometimes. And what they'll focus on is just what's in front of them, and not what is going to give them the long-term benefits or prosperity. So I'll give you a simple example. So some migrants, for example, who come and study here and maybe do a master's degree, and they'll spend maybe say $70,000, $80,000, $120,000 on that process, right? And then when it comes down to, say, for example, going for their permanent residency later on in the process, and hiring a migration lawyer to help them with that process, some of them don't do that, right? So they will think about the cash flow, the pros and cons, but they forget the fact that in this whole journey they've already invested $100,000, and whether you invest $100,000 or you invest $105,000, it's still the same ballpark figure. But they would get set on that specific amount and not see the value. So I think that's probably one thing that I've noticed over the years, that people don't look at the bigger picture, and they'll kind of narrow down and look at everything with a microscope, and that's probably one thing that yeah, I've noticed. Yes.
Very good observation. Can you sort of share any tips from your own personal experience in terms of how people can improve their mindset and the outcomes that flow from that then?
Yep. So I think it's just about taking a step back and looking at it holistically, and making decisions that are going to be best for your long-term future. And so that's probably one thing that I would say. Another thing that just coming to my mind now is that you should think about future steps as well. So always think about 2 or 3 steps ahead when you're planning the journey. So the migrant journey is, as I've observed and personally experienced, it's not an easy one. It's a journey that, unless you've gone on it yourself, it's sometimes a bit hard to understand from an external point of view. The trials and tribulations, the small decisions that lead to future outcomes. The fact that there's so many elements that are critical, and if one of the elements breaks down, that can impact your whole journey and your whole experience. And I think that's where looking at things from a holistic point of view, having a plan in place, having a 1, 3, 5 year plan for a new migrant is critical. And I think not enough people come with that plan. And look, that plan can change, and life happens and things change, but having that plan, I think, is very important for a new migrant.
Yeah, very good point. As you say, I don't think there's many, unless you've been through the experience of moving to and working and living in another country, the level of uncertainty, of complexity that goes with every aspect of that, for things that people that have been living in the country for a long time just take for absolutely granted, like speaking the language, yet alone just knowing how to interact without thinking, almost operating on remote control, compared to absolutely everything that you do in every minute of the day initially being foreign, different and challenging. I don't think many people get their head around just how much of a mental imposition and emotional imposition that is. So having someone alongside them like yourself who can actually give them some of that guidance and direction and support through that very difficult journey can be very helpful. But one other thing that's sort of allied to that, I guess, and again, around this mindset subject, I'm not sure about yourself, but you've been an employee of some major corporates and you've worked with companies all over the world. You've also spent the last 7 years building JICS as an entrepreneur in the self-employed space. Given your own experience, what do you see as the difference between the mindsets between employees and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. Look, the mindset difference that I found is that as an employee, some employees obviously have this mindset already, and they will drive things forward and they will take action and be proactive. But as an employee, it's not a necessity to have that. Like, you always have a manager, you always have a boss, you always have, maybe KPIs or company expectations. And therefore, you're accountable and you're given direction, and you need to kind of execute within that direction and towards that strategy. Now, what happens is when you start your own business is that there is no one to hold you to account. And that also means that, if you don't take action yourself, if you're not continuously innovating, if you're not continuously pushing, then nothing will happen, and your business doesn't really go anywhere. So if you don't have that kind of self-drive, and you don't have that energy to try and innovate and push and hustle on a daily basis, then it's very hard to launch a business from the ground up and take it forward. And that's where I think there's a bit of a mindset shift that's required from going from an employee into a business owner or an entrepreneur.
Well, that's a great lead into the next question, because I'd love your thoughts on how can we shift others' attitudes, outlooks and expectations in relation to mindset and opportunity. Have you got any thoughts around that? Given you've been in both camps and you've lived and moved countries, there's no bigger shake-up for mindset than that. Have you got anything to share with us around that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's, I can go granular level or high level. I guess if I go a little bit more granular, then it's just, it's intricacies of culture, basically, from shifting countries, and we see that all the time. So we work with, for example, a lot of people from the subcontinental community, and they come here, and what will happen is, for example, we'll help them get into a new job, and help them with their visa process and so forth. But, like, for example, let's say they get into a new job, and when they enter the new job, everyone is nice and friendly, but no one takes them out to lunch. No one takes them out in the first couple of weeks, and they feel like they're doing something wrong, and something has gone wrong with what they've presented themselves as, for no one to be inviting them out to lunch. But what they don't know is that it's just not in the Australian culture to do that. Like, people here usually have their errands to run, and have lunch on their own, and it's their downtime. Whereas in the subcontinent, everyone has lunch together. They sit around the round table, and it's a big kind of a big get together in that culture. So it's these little things, right? So we're there to guide them in that direction, tell them that, this is just a cultural difference. There's nothing that you're doing wrong or incorrect. And this is just one example, but there's many different things that happen. And as a migrant, you don't understand what's happening because no one's really advised you or told you. And then therefore it can build up to, create, worry in your mind, essentially. So these are the things that I think, we hopefully play a role in terms of helping the migrants in their journeys as a granular sort of an example to your question.
Yeah, I love it. It's really, because it comes down to those day-to-day things that we form perceptions about, and often when we're in a foreign environment, we're always questioning ourselves rather than going, okay, well, what's really going on here? And we've got nothing to reference against. So love that. While we're on the migration subject, then, given what I talked about in the intro, Aman, how important is migration to the future of the country, along with housing and property, from your perspective?
Yeah. Look, I'll preempt this answer by saying, I'm not an economist or an immigration or political expert in any way. So this is just, my general thoughts. But, from what I've observed in COVID, obviously, no migration led to a lot of issues in supply chain. For example, in Australia, it led to, a big shortage of workers. It led to, many different sort of issues that came up. And I think, that's number one, that's very important, right? Because Australia relies on that migration to, fix some of those shortages in the market, So, for example, if there's a shortage of, say, social workers, nurses, teachers, the government can utilize the migration policy to direct people in that direction by making it appealing for that to be a pathway, and therefore addressing those shortages. Now, if you have no migration, how is it going to be addressed? There's some things that local Australians just don't want to do. And so that's where the issue comes into play. And for me, that having that lever and having that migration, that's very, very important. I think the Australian economy relies on it. Obviously, the universities here rely on international students. That's a big part of what they do. And without that inflow coming in, then we'll start seeing other headlines. And I think you touched on the news and the media and the headlines. The news and media will do headlines one way or the other. Like with the property market, it's always booming or it's always doom and gloom. It's never going to be, it's consistently stable. There's no news article there. There's no bites. So it's similar with migration. Either it's way too much or it's not enough, or one thing or the other. So I think we have to keep it a little bit in perspective and look at it from like you said, a long-term holistic approach, which I completely agree with.
Yeah, no, well said. Now, it's sort of back on the migrant situation itself, and we've touched on this a little bit already, but so that not only newcomers to the country can empathise with what we're talking about, I'd love for you to share sort of the challenges and the obstacles that migrants face in coming to Australia, and then making the most of our great land opportunity after they actually arrive. Given you're perfectly positioned within that exercise to see it, and in what you've done in your own life, can you share and put a little bit more colour around that for us?
Yep, sure, sure. So look, the start of the journey is often, the immigration process for a lot of individuals, whether they're coming here as skilled migrants or even international students. And, that process is very complex. Migration laws are very complex. And kind of navigating that process, navigating the heavy documentation that's required in that process. And again, it comes down to country norms as well. So, what might be easy to attain in Australia is very difficult to attain in India, for example, and that could be your work history, employment letters, to give you a simple example. So so those kind of things come into play, and obviously we won't go deep diving into all these aspects, but that migration journey, the strategy, the complexity, I think that's the number one thing. It takes time usually, and you have to be consistent, and you have to make a lot of key decisions along that journey. Once you land here, I think. And this is one of the main reasons in our earlier chat, you asked me like why we started JICS and why we, went down this path, is that we found that once migrants reach here, the level of support that they are provided with is sometimes lacking in some areas. And to help them integrate into the community, to help them get into the job market, there isn't that level of support there. And that's one of the reasons why we started JICS, is to, kind of bridge that gap, because it is very different here. The job market is different. The interview process is different. How your CV needs to look is very different. And we found that there was a big gap in terms of the level of support being provided, and I think that's where we like to feel that we add a lot of value in terms of our clients' journeys as well.
Yeah, and I love that. Now, once people arrive, I mean, given the massive rental shortages and housing accessibility issues that we face in most parts of the country now, I noticed that you wrote a really good LinkedIn post recently that talked about how migrants can more easily find housing in Australia despite the housing and rental shortages. Can you share some of that with us?
Yep, definitely. So I think it's a case of that. There's no magic solution to this problem. I think it's a case of utilizing all the avenues that you have available. So, for example, with us, we have collaborations in place with a couple of partners who have got extensive housing options across Australia, and the people that come through us, obviously, we utilize that network to help them get into that first property where they might live for maybe 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. If that's not the case, and if I talk more broadly, it's about, utilizing your network, the people that in Australia, the people that can maybe help you, because again, when you're physically overseas, getting that, rental apartment application approved can be challenging. And then if you have an advocate on the ground here that's going to help you, like a friend or a family member that can definitely, take the risk or reduce the risk in that process as well. So yeah, it's some of those things that are I think essential. And I think the other thing that migrants should keep in mind is where they live is also just as important when they initially arrive. And again, depends on your personality. Do you want to be somewhere where there is that strong sense of your local community at the present, or do you want to be somewhere where maybe you want to be in a location where it's close to a certain office buildings or the beach, or something that you enjoy doing. So I think those things you need to really think about and make those decisions about where you live, because that has a huge impact on your long term as well.
Yeah, no, extremely well said. I mentioned in the intro that many media commentators and pollies are actually blaming migration for our current housing woes, and there's increasing calls from all sides of the exercise for potentially migrant numbers to be reduced significantly, and caps and all the rest of it. Well, what's your view on that?
Yeah, so I think, I think similar to the media, the politicians will say one extreme or the other, depending on where the wind is blowing and on where the votes are coming from as well. But it's again, you have to look at it in perspective, in terms of it can't. I think the extreme stances and things. I think we've seen in previous occasions as well, even with the property side as well, when the government steps in and does something extreme one way or the other, it really has the positive impact that we envisage. I think the market needs to kind of cater to itself, and over time, the equilibrium and the right balance is obtained from that point of view. So I think, capping migration numbers again, it's an easy sort of out for people, and kind of blankets over the fact that yes, there is supply issues, there is building issues. Is there enough support? Is there enough grants for those new houses to be created? Which has obviously not been the case. The number of companies that have fallen down over the last kind of 3 or 4 years. I mean, I don't know about you, but I see an article every second day in terms of the building industry and what's happening. So is there enough support around that? Is the long-term planning in terms of being correct in terms of where they're going to invest that housing and how it's invested? There's all these things. Again, I'm not a political person or an economist, so I don't want to deep dive too much into it, but those are my general thoughts as a citizen, I guess.
Yeah, no, and they're the important ones ultimately, because we're the ones who are actually seeing it on the ground rather than all the narrative hype that goes with it. And sadly, I think we live in a world now where we're looking for instant answers and simple answers. So we try and draw direct links and have one thing to blame, when the reality of life is that it's very, very dynamic, and there are a whole host of interrelated factors and features that are influencing everything all the time. So rather than look broader, we want to sort of just throw a dart at a bullseye that's going to be the answer for all of the issues, and often I think deflects the attention from the things that are actually causing the issue at times. But I guess, again, sitting at the heart of seeing and linking to a fair degree where opportunity is in Australia with where migrants are coming in to fill that, from your hands-on perspective, what ongoing opportunities is migration bringing to Australia?
So I think we touched on this earlier as well, but that innovation side and the work ethic and that real drive to kind of push things forward, I think is where the migrant community as a general whole really brings that hunger, that drive, that ability to make a difference, and the innovation. And look, Australia is obviously the migrant community is not as well established. So, for example, if you look at, say, the US and the UK, and the third, fourth, fifth generation migrants are now leading the country and leading large tech companies, leading political parties as well. And Australia is not quite there yet, right? We haven't quite got to that third, fourth, fifth generation, which is which will come over time. And that's where the value will come in, and that's why Australia will grow economically and become hopefully more of a powerhouse as well, because they do add that value and they do drive things forward, and that's why I think it's a critical element that can't be ignored.
Yeah, well said. Now I want to sort of switch back into the investing arena for a minute, particularly with property and mining. It's the undertone of the podcast, and I'd love your thoughts on, given you've been an excellent role model in this regard, how can migrants and other hardworking Aussies save and invest successfully without creating a second job or hamstringing and sacrificing their lifestyle in the process?
Yep. So I think this is a very individualistic type approach that one needs to take, and it's about doing things that are going to be sustainable and long-term sustainable, I would say. So this is one other thing that I see quite often, is that people will come up with an extreme idea and then try to implement that extreme idea, and it really works, and it can be on any topic really. And I think so that's where it's about that consistency and longevity. If I talk a little bit high level, and so creating a plan that you can kind of stick to over a long period of time, and it's likely to not come unstuck. And I think if they come up with that sort of plan and build from small blocks, right? So as a migrant, it's rare that you will come to Australia and suddenly have that ability to splash out loads of cash. So mostly it's about saving slowly, building it up slowly, and having that, and that's perfectly fine. And that's what I would suggest is even if you can get something for 300-400K as an investment property, start with that. Get going in that direction, and you'll see the rewards in the next few years, hopefully.
Yeah, I love that. And sort of leveraging into that, I'd love your thoughts, particularly from a migrant perspective, on rent vesting, where you rent where you live and then you put your surpluses into growing an asset base, as well as for those that, the Australian dream is that everyone owns their own home, and quite often they'll buy their own Taj Mahal and then put a noose around their neck for 30 years because they've got no ability to invest in anything else. So if we look at rent vesting, and we also look at those that put all their energy into home and then paying off the home loan before they invest, what are your views on both of those?
Look, this is a tricky one, because, from I guess a cultural mindset, I understand where people come from in terms of prioritizing their home, and that's that's where your family roots are going to be, and that's where you want to kind of build the foundation and the building block for your life. So I completely respect and understand that point of view. But then if you look at purely from a numbers point of view, then it might be that, rent vesting is the smarter monetary move, and something that, allows you to maybe scale the portfolio faster, and then, maybe allow you to get a better dream home, down the track. And I think this is where, that whole narrative around, delayed gratification, comes into play, and so forth. So I think, I'm not here to say, which approach is right or better, or, in terms of that side. But I mean, look, I think it comes to do with, what are you prioritizing? What are your goals, and what's going to give you that comfort over, over your life and your mindset. So I think it's an individualistic decision.
Yeah, well said, because it does come down to the needs of the individual in the end of the day. And again, focusing on the migrant aspect here, given that you're working with migrants day in, day out, where do migrants and/or new aspiring investors need to start in relation to property investing, and what steps do you think they need to take to start heading down that journey?
Yep. So I guess my personal journey, I would say, where I started was, reading books and listening to podcasts. So that's where I got a lot of my information. I was able to learn from other guests who'd successfully done things, experts like yourself who've been in the industry for a long time, and I was able to share and listen to a lot of different views and different approaches, and then make my own decision as to which approach resonated with me, and which one I wanted to follow. So I think and that's a that's a cost-effective and effective strategy to build that knowledge, and which is obviously critical, because once you, and I think you said this last time, that once you have the knowledge, that's when you get the confidence, and that's where your risk appetite will also increase. So it's definitely something that I agree with 100%.
Yeah, beautifully said. Well, look, really enjoyed the conversation today and last week, in sort of bringing it all to a head. Aman, what are your key takeaways and initial actions that aspiring migrants and investors need to be taking, do you think?
Yep. So in terms of a property investments perspective?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the key thing is to firstly, there's a couple of key things. So one is finance, right? So property investing is definitely a game of finance, and so you need to go to your mortgage broker or go to your bank, and figure out what's going to be viable and feasible given your salary level, given your projected savings, your family situation, how many dependents you have, all those things that they factor in. So I think that's number one, is to figure out what is actually viable for you. And then based on, what is the viability and what is the kind of budget that you're looking at, then you need to build a strategy around it, in terms of, if this is going to be my borrowing cap of the next 3 to 4 years, how can I best use this borrowing capacity, and then work with, an expert, or if you're financially quite savvy and really passionate about property, then obviously you can look at it as an independent as well. But yeah, I think those are the couple of key things. So firstly, get the financial acumen that you need, and then secondly, try and understand the property market and the key drivers and the functions that really drive the growth in the long term.
I love that. That music to my ears, Aman, as having a finance broking team and seeing the foundational importance of knowing what you can do as well as measuring that against what you want to do. It's a very fundamental step. So 100% on board with what you're saying there. I now want to switch into the second round of the ambush round, where I give the old blindfold and cigarette and then hit you with the quick questions that everyone wants your answers on. And the first of those, Aman, is what's your favourite quote and why?
Look, this is a one that it's always changing for me. Sometimes over the years it's changed. In my early days it was something different, and now it's something different. But one that I've been kind of drilling into my team and getting them to they're starting to hear it and probably get sick of it now is a quote called "Always be hustling," so ABH, as I like to say. And I'm trying to instill that into what they do and in their day-to-day activities, and it's just about when I say always be hustling, I'm talking about just going that extra mile for the clients, trying to go above and beyond, trying to push as much as we can, as hard as we can, and make a difference as much as is feasible. So I think that's probably the one that I'm using a lot these days.
I love it. ABH. That's that one's stuck in my mind now. I love acronyms, so I'll be repeating that one. Switching into the habit arena, because as you know, it's the little things that we do regularly, consistently, day in, day out, that turn small things into big things. So what's a personal happy habit, rewarding ritual, or daily discipline that you've employed that you think's contributed most to your success today?
Yeah. Look, one thing that I think I've employed over the years is something where I like to call it, something that I like to call working while others are sleeping. So I think that's something that it really has helped me in terms of growing things and taking them forward, and so whether that's in the morning from kind of 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. or whether it's in the evening when from 10 p.m. to midnight. So I feel like if I can be productive during that time when others are fast asleep, then that's where I can make a difference and really drive things forward. So that's something that I've employed over the years.
Love that. And the good other thing too is that your properties are working while you're sleeping, because they're doing the work without needing you to do it. So beautifully said. Last question in the round. If you could wave a magic wand and change anything, what would you change about investing?
If I could wave a magic wand, I am impatient by nature sometimes. So investing for me is obviously, having that patience and constantly telling myself that, I need to be patient, and, it's a long game, not a short game, especially with property investing. And so that, but if anything could be done to make that gratification faster, then of course that would be fantastic.
I love that. Now, again, just to bring things to a close, what's one final thought that you'd like to leave us with?
Yep. Well, one final thought, I guess, towards from the migrant community is that, look, migrating to Australia, it's not easy, has its challenges. So if you're thinking about migrating here, or you're here and it's tough, just understand that, you're not alone. It is a hard journey. And, the first generation migrant is finds it usually the hardest, and know that you're setting yourself up, and also you're setting future generations up for a much better life, and always keep that perspective in mind.
I love that. If I ask you to get invested, what does that mean to you, Aman?
If you ask me to get invested, for me it's about learning and focus, so whatever you decide to do. So I have a philosophy that if you're going to do something, do it 100% or don't do it at all. And so when it comes to, say, property investing as an example, so if you're going to do it, then, you have to dedicate time and effort into it. I mean, sure, you can hire all the experts in the world, but ultimately no one cares about your property journey as much as you do. And therefore, to make the most out of those experts, you have to be invested and put time and effort into it. So that would be what I'd say.
And I always say you've got to manage your managers. You own the team, but you've got to manage the managers, because if you don't, then they'll be doing things to their benefit, not necessarily yours. So beautifully said. Aman, for those in the audience who've really resonated with your message, how can they find out more or get involved with you?
Yep, definitely. So the easiest way is to head to our website, which is jics.com.au. So jics.com.au, and just get in touch with us. We've got our contact details, and also we have some free consultations available as well for some of our business areas. And love to get in touch and help out where we can.
Really done. Now, I know you've been very generous because in talking off air, you've made a very special offer for Get Invested listeners, where you're going to give away a signed cricket ball from none other than the legendary Brett Lee, who's also a bit of an ex-Bollywood star, I think, in that perspective, Alan. And I guess what we like to do is make sure the listeners are actually making some effort to earn the exercise. So Brett Lee's going to give them a signed cricket ball. And again, I think I might be applying for this one too, by the way, because I'm a massive Brett Lee fan. So if you email us at hello@knowhowproperty.com.au and you give us your top takeaway that you learned from Aman's awesome conversation here on Get Invested, then Aman's going to decide who's the best place to enjoy that shiny red. So look, I really want to thank you for taking the time to open our eyes to the opportunities that the right mindset, fueled by the opportunity of migration, creates for property and the country at whole. The last 2 episodes, Aman. And before we close, I just need to ask everyone a very big favour that will only take a couple of seconds of time, because currently about 69% of you still who watch the Property Hub podcast don't subscribe. So if you've ever enjoyed our shows and videos, like the conversation we've just had with Aman, following the hours that myself and my support team put into preparing and producing the episodes, I just want to ask you to do us a massive favour and just hit the subscribe button now. It helps the Property Hub channel more than you know, and I promise you that the bigger the channel gets, the better the guests are going to get, and the better that your investment one is going to get. And to keep the conversation going, just join and jump into our Property Hub Collective in our interactive Facebook community by clicking the link in the show notes, where myself and other property professionals can answer any or all of your personal queries and continue to share our knowledge with you and other like-minded hardworking Aussies in a very safe, no-pressure environment. So jump on board, and thanks again for all of your time today and getting invested, Aman.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. Make sure you subscribe to Property Hub for free. Get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's top online property show for red-hot property investing news and insights direct from industry leaders and influencers. And finally, I'll see you next time.